I'm Laura Heaton, the writer and editor of the blog at the Enough Project called Enough Said. The Enough Project is part of the Center for American Progress here in Washington, D.C. And today we are here with Colin Thomas-Jensen, the policy advisor for Enough, to talk about the International Criminal Court. And the timing of this interview and conversation is to take stock of what's happened with the International Criminal Court in the past few weeks, when it's actually received a lot of attention given news reports about the African Union's decision to ignore the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant for the Sudanese president. And then many of you probably watched last night on PBS the film called The Reckoning, The Battle for the International Criminal Court, which chronicles the first 6 years of the court's life and follows many of the personalities of people who are associated with the court. So today we wanted to sit down and just have Colin update us on some of the recent developments of the ICC, and also provide a venue for taking some questions that might have arisen from that screening last night. So we can get started here, and if you are interested in submitting a question to Colin, you can submit it here online through the live chat or via Twitter. So we'll get started. Thank you so much, Colin.
My pleasure.
Okay, so last night, as those of us who tuned into The Reckoning saw, the film left off with the chief prosecutor of the ICC filing for some arrest warrants for the Sudanese president, and also pressing for the existing arrest warrants for two of the high-ranking Sudanese officials to be acted upon. And so I thought it would be interesting. Clearly a lot has happened since the film has ended, and I think that it would be very fascinating to hear if you could just update us on some of these recent developments, and particularly how the reaction has been seen in Africa.
Sure. As you said, the film left off with the prosecutor applying for an arrest warrant for President Bashir. The judges came back and did then issue a warrant for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Not, it was pointed out by many commentators, for the crime of genocide, which was another crime that the prosecutor had accused Bashir of committing. The reaction, I think, globally was mixed. From the human rights community, there was a large outpouring of support for the court's action. I think we're well beyond the point in which you can argue that the Sudanese government did not, in fact, commit massive crimes against humanity in Darfur. If you think that's not the case, you've been living in a cave for the past few years. Crimes have been committed. The government was involved, and the prosecutor has elected, as part of his strategy, to go after President Bashir as commander in forces of the army. The reaction on the other side from many circles was that this move against the president of Sudan would actually disrupt the peace process, would hinder opportunities for a peaceful settlement in Darfur. And we saw a lot of back and forth, a lot of debate on op-ed pages, on blogs, over the merits of the prosecutor's action. And particularly in Africa, I think we've seen the African Union issued this statement, as you noted, ignoring, they've decided to ignore the arrest warrant. It's an interesting formulation. I can't think of any other times when a body like the African Union has elected to ignore something. And I think it speaks to a few things. One, I think it speaks to there are divisions amongst African leaders over the merits of the ICC's move in Sudan. And I think we're already seeing that. We're seeing some countries breaking rank, specifically Botswana, Uganda, already coming out and saying, in fact, they don't agree with that decision. And there's a real sense, I think, we're seeing this decision being played by opponents of the court as an expression of African public opinion. But I would argue that, in fact, this move by the African Union is actually, in many ways, showing just how divorced African leadership is on this issue from African people themselves. We've seen a lot of research. Myself have spent time on the continent recently talking to people in countries where the ICC is active who are very supportive of the ICC's actions, and specifically of their actions in Sudan, that see that introducing accountability into a situation where there has been none is one way, and a very effective way, to change the cost-benefit analysis of the parties, and particularly in this case, the government.
Okay, great. Well, and maybe you can even talk a bit, I think it is surprising that we are really only seeing Uganda and Botswana so far who have stood up. What do you think are some of the issues that are playing into this cost-benefit analysis, I guess, that have caused fewer people to be vocal about their opposition?
The African Union is a much different beast than its predecessor, the Organization for African Union, which was largely criticized as simply a forum for dictators to air their dirty laundry at the world. I think that this African Union has taken a strong stand on coups and forcible changes of power. It did so in Togo, it did so in Mauritania, it did so in Madagascar, whereas it's taken an opposite stand on international accountability for crimes against humanity.
Right.
And I think this says a couple of things. One, clearly the leadership they're voting on things that that threaten them. If you're threatened by a military coup or a forcible change of power, okay, that's bad. Also threatening to many leaders on the continent, it must be said, is the threat of international prosecution. Omar al-Bashir is not the only head of state who could justifiably be targeted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I think clearly this decision to ignore the arrest warrant is a manifestation of those concerns that are shared amongst leaders. Why we haven't seen more breaking rank, and especially signatories to the court, and those states that have actually 30 of them, is I think in large part due to a real imbalance in the lobbying efforts, for lack of a better word, on the part of the Sudanese government on one hand, and the international community and supporters of the court on another. The government of Sudan has been working really full-time since the case of Sudan was referred to the ICC by the Security Council to create a backlash in Africa, in the Arab world, against the court's actions, and quite effectively. And I think much less effectively have the court's backers, and I think that must be said here specifically European countries, those countries which were really integral along with the Clinton administration, and we can get to that later, in establishing the court and providing it with the real, with a home and institutional backing, that those countries have, I think, failed in large part to make the case forcefully to their allies and their counterparts in Africa, in the Arab world, and elsewhere, that in fact accountability in Sudan is a necessary piece of a comprehensive solution.
Okay, I think if we could switch gears a little bit too, because I think that obviously the attention right now has been focused on Sudan, but the court is doing very important work on other conflicts in Africa specifically. So I wondered if you could maybe highlight some of those cases that we've actually seen the first trial begin recently. So if you could talk a little bit about that, I think that